So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. I'm Tracy Cohen with the College of Continuing Education at Sacramento State. I'll be producing today's session. All that means is I'll help behind the scenes with anything technical, right? I'll be supporting Cathy as she presents to you today. But should you need anything specific with regard to technology, please reach out to me directly. You'll find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And I think with that, Cathy, I'm going to turn it over to you. That's all I have today.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy, so much. I'm really excited to be here. I always prefer to talk to folks in person when I can, live, but like Tracy and I were saying a few minutes ago, it's really cool over Zoom, over virtual, that we can reach so many people and everything is so much more accessible. So I'm really excited about that. My name is Cathy Rojas. My pronouns are she and hers, and I am one of the counselors here at Sac State, here in our state capital. This is also where I was raised. I'm native to Sacramento, and so I just absolutely love it here. I love Sac State. It's a great place to work. I love our counseling staff. I'm trying to think of what else is important to say. I'm a pretty informal person. So when I do presentations, I really just like to give whatever information is important to you. Yes, stingers up. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to watch the chat as much as possible. Stingers up. Absolutely. Let's see, I guess as far as who I am professionally, I did my undergrad at Cabrillo College for junior college. If anyone's familiar with that, it's a feeder community college to UC Santa Cruz. So I did my first part of my undergrad there and then went to UC Santa Cruz and studied psychology. And then I went all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, and I did my graduate training in clinical psychology at Argosy University in Atlanta, and got my PsyD there and started a blended family. Well, I was there in Georgia, and so my husband and I stayed in Georgia for quite a few years until my stepdaughter was grown and gone off to college, and we moved back here in 2018. I have to say, I love college and I love working with college students. And so that's a really big part of why I'm here and why I'm doing this work. When I was in my graduate training, we would go to different training sites and get experience being therapists. And about halfway through my training, I was placed at Georgia State in Atlanta, and I just loved it. I loved the students there. They actually, in a lot of ways, were very similar to Sac State students, a lot of non-traditional folks dealing with, a lot of psychosocial stressors. And I just thought, like, I love college counseling. And so I stayed in college for my internship. I got my first job in a college counseling center in Georgia. And I said, when I move back to Sacramento, I want to work at Sac State. So here I am. Luckily, that worked out. Luckily, my goal was met, and they wanted me here as part of the team. I know that the different CSUs, we have different draws, different populations that we serve, depending on where we're at in the state, who's coming to our school. But I definitely see Sac State students as really gritty students. They work really hard and they have a lot of odds stacked against them, and they still are able to prioritize college and be successful in college. And it's really amazing. And so I have a lot of respect for the students here. So today we're going to be talking about self-care, and I think one of my goals of this presentation for y'all is to really break down, like, what is self-care and what is maybe not self-care, right? The importance of self-care, We're going to go into a little bit of the history of self-care. I'm not like a historian, but I think it's always important to talk about where something came from and how it's evolved to what it is today. And in the case of self-care, we're going to talk a little bit about like where it got a little wonky. And I really want to give y'all some thinking points, some ideas about how you can implement self-care in your life, and how you can help folks that you are leading, whether it's students or otherwise, to have maybe a better view or a more grounded view of self-care in their own lives. So hopefully we will achieve that. What else was I going to say before we start? Like I said, I'm pretty informal and I'm going to try to watch the chat. I'm not one of those who is like, wait till the end with your questions. If something comes up and you have a question, just please feel free to throw it in the chat, or please feel free to unmute yourself and shout it out. Some colleagues of mine and I were just talking earlier today that it's difficult to interrupt people sometimes. Like we feel kind of like, oh, like that's rude. Please just unmute and interrupt me. Just Cathy, hang on, I have a question. Like it's totally fine. Or a comment, or if you relate, totally okay. So the reason that I picked the title of this presentation is that self-care currently has been very kind of, I would say, pigeonholed into what it looks like, right? We have these ideas about self-care, and to me, when I think of self-care, this is immediately what comes to my mind, is things like bath bombs and yoga. With that said, I have to tell you, I really love bath bombs. They are really fun. If you don't know what a bath bomb is, it's like this, I don't even know what it's made of. Really things that smell really nice and they're fizzy, and you throw them in the bath water and they make it smell really good. And there's a company called Lush that is like very fancy, and they make these really great bath bombs. So it's not that I don't love bath bombs or use them. Also yoga, and I'll comment on yoga a little bit more later. I also love yoga. I love certain types of yoga. I love yoga that is trauma-informed and body inclusive. I cannot keep up with the yoga that's more like a cardio workout, like can't do it, don't love it for me. But this is also not to say that yoga is not part of people's healing process. But also it's become kind of like hashtag yoga and very westernized in some ways. And so again, this is kind of like a stereotypical idea for a lot of folks nowadays about what is self-care. So that's where the title comes from. But I think also too, with these types of things, bath bombs, yoga, a face mask, a lot of times these are like catch-all kind of stereotypical suggestions that people receive when they don't feel well, whether they don't feel well mentally, whether they don't feel well physically. A lot of folks who don't really know how to approach that, they'll say, oh, well, have you tried yoga? It might make you feel better. Or have you tried, just relaxing with a face mask? It might make you feel better. When maybe that person's like struggling with some serious depression or, financial worries, and that might not really help. So let's delve in. Let's see here. Got my technology going. There we go. So what are we going to cover? What is self-care? And this is going to be sort of really woven throughout the presentation, the workshop today, is what is self-care? Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of like, where does this come from? The idea of wellness in today's society and pop culture. And I want to go into, like I said, some types of self-care, like what can this look like and how do we do it? How do we do self-care? Hopefully you'll hang in with me because I try to be as concrete as possible. But sometimes it's a little vague, right? Or sometimes we have some conflicting truths about things. And so sometimes we can say, well, it's like this is self-care, but also maybe this is not self-care. And how do we put those two things together? So Again, I love SpongeBob. I think he has some really great expressions. But in general, what is self-care? It's caring for ourselves, right? And I think that that gets lost sometimes because of all the things that it can look like. But it's really a pretty easy idea to understand at its core. Sometimes I think about, plants. I've gotten into plants lately. I'm able to keep them alive. Like I've had some plants now for over a year. It's really an amazing feat for me. What do I do to care for my plants? How do I keep them alive? How do I keep them, doing what they're supposed to do as plants? I water them. I sometimes feed them, give them the little sticks. I got to prune them back a little bit. I have to make sure they have the right light, right? Like you can't just put it where it looks cute. I learned that about plants. You have to put it where it's getting the right amount of light and the right temperature. And then that's kind of it, right? And of course, we're not plants. Of course, there's much more going on, but at its root, that is what self-care is. It's caring for ourselves. And I think that sometimes we get confused about what that might look like, and it gets really complicated when it doesn't always have to. So where does self-care come from? This is not a comprehensive history of self-care. I absolutely have to give that disclaimer. There are whole books written on this topic that, it could be probably a whole semester class. But as far back as Socrates, people were talking about care of the self. And what does that look like? And in those days with Socrates, what he meant by that, it was not bath bombs. It was not a really good smelling lotion. It was not taking a spa day. It was the idea of knowing yourself. It was the idea of meditation and self-reflection and really being considerate about yourself, who you are in the world. Ethical development was part of that. Like, are you being like a good ethical person? And it was this very connective kind of idea. So it was care of the self also as a means to be considerate of others, to be considerate of the world around you, and to be in harmony with those things. And I think if we think of self-care today, a lot of that is not reflected anymore in what self-care is, right? But as far back as that time, that is what self-care was thought to be. It was really about nourishing your soul or nourishing just who you are and how you are with people around you so that everybody can grow and thrive and feel good. Now, I said it re-emerged in the US. I'm sure, like I said, if we did an exhaustive history of self-care, I'm sure there are things between Socrates and the 1950s. But there was a re-emergence, I would say, in more like popular culture, or it becoming a more predominant idea in the US in the 1950s. Again, this is I'm focused on the US. I'm sure there were things going on in other countries as well. With the advent of medical advances, a lot of folks started relying on doctors as experts, right? This very paternalistic idea of you're the expert, fix me. And there was a lot of focus on treatment rather than prevention. So what's wrong with you? Can you come to fix, can you fix me? I'm going to do what you say. And as much as we do need professionals, I am not a medical doctor, but I'm someone that people come to that they say, I don't feel good, and can you help me feel better? There is something to that, right? We, as folks who have different education levels or different expertise levels, we do have different knowledge than the folks who are coming to us for help. But there was not as much of a sharing as that knowledge. It wasn't as egalitarian. It was a lot of reliance on the authority of doctors to help and fix. And what started happening was there was this idea of patient-centered medicine. And it happened a lot with those who were, say, infirm. So maybe folks with mental illness who were in a kind of, in the like a residential facility, older adults, things like that. And the focus was on those basic things, like those basic plant care things, right? Doctors were going in and saying, you know, um, make sure you're taking care of your hygiene, make sure you're eating well, make sure you're exercising. And to us today, we're like, yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, right? But at that time, that was a big deal to put that in the hands of those folks and say, like, you also can have some power and control over your own well-being and doing those really basic things to help your health on a day-to-day basis. And so again, like I said, nowadays we're like, well, yeah, I mean, that's all part of self-care. That's all part of well-being. But at that time, that was a really big deal, to kind of share the knowledge and share the agency. That is not to say that just caught on and it just took off like wildfire, right? There were still a lot of people, and I don't want to say were like they're not now. This is still going on today, but there were a lot of populations that were not getting that care, right? They were not getting cared for by doctors, the medical system, what was of the mental health system at that time. And so multiple groups, but one is the Black Panther Party. They were pretty instrumental in creating community wellness and helping folks who were oppressed, underserved communities to get the care that they needed that was maybe lacking from professionals. They really focused on that autonomy of like, you're going to also help care for yourself, and it's going to come from the community. And so there were a lot of programs. There were, community health centers that were open. There was a really big program on free breakfast for children in the community, all of these things. And that was viewed as part of self-care, right? Like you are feeding yourself, you're feeding the other folks that you're connected to as well. It would be super great if we said that, and again, that caught on and everything was fine, right? Like there are still systemic issues, there are still these things, but this is part of historically how self-care and community care started ramping up in the United States. This is a really frequently quoted quote from Audre Lorde. I had to put it on here, even though you may have seen it before, but I really love it. And I think the reason why it is so frequently quoted is that it really speaks quite a bit to the idea that not only is self-care not selfish, but the purpose of self-care. So I think this quote is from, I think it might've been the 80s. But she says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And one of the biggest parts I like is that it's self-preservation. That's part of what we're doing, right? We are caring for ourselves. We are preserving ourselves. And it's not about indulging yourself. It's not about spoiling yourself. That is not what self-care is. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to engage in self-care because that's what they feel that it is. It's self-indulgence, it's spoiling yourself, it's giving yourself an easy way out. Thank you, Tracy. Also in pop culture, where it started to get wonky, I don't have a specific date, but I would say in the last 20 years, especially really in like the last 3 or 4 years, there has been an uptick in the idea of self-care. People are astronomically Googling more, what is self-care ideas. We saw that with the pandemic. Self-care is like huge now, and it's really like I said, it's getting pretty wonky. I really like this quote as well. It's become like a balm to make you feel temporarily just a tiny bit better. And while that sounds really nice, it's not sustainable, right? Like it's not something that we're doing that will make us better in the long run. It's like this little hack, we hear about life hacks. It's this little hack to use that feels so good in that moment, but doesn't really last. It doesn't really do anything, and it's not really helping us. Flossing your teeth is not a life hack, right? Like it's something we need to do to keep our teeth healthy and our bodies healthy. But self-care, a lot of the behaviors and activities and strategies have become more like a life hack. It's very focused on the self and individualism. And of course, like, yeah, it is, again, it's self-care focused on the self. But a lot of times that community piece is missing, right? The community caring for us and us caring for the community as well. And it's a lot of times it's synonymous with this idea of coddling ourselves, of like, I'm going to give myself this treat that feels really good, and not pushing myself out of my comfort zone, when sometimes that is what self-care is. It's pushing yourself, it's growing, it's challenging yourself. It's doing things that are uncomfortable a lot of times. And what I've seen, especially from a lot of students now coming into Sac State, is this belief that self-care is about being in your comfort zone. My self-care is taking a day off from my stresses. My self-care is not exercising. My self-care is eating whatever I want, which those things, again, like maybe they are self-care in some ways, but it's about not doing anything difficult, which again is not always really self-care. And so things have gotten kind of imbalanced. And I think, we think now folks are relying on things that are not really making them feel better. It's also often performative. So there's a lot of hashtags out there, right? Like from what I gather, the students and the younger folks, they're on Instagram. That's the thing now. I still use Facebook and I do Instagram. There's probably other things out there, but I think that that's the biggest one. And a lot of it is, look at what I'm doing for self-care. Look at what I'm doing to treat myself. Look at what I've done. When, again, I'm not against anybody promoting self-care or encouraging it in others, but it's something a lot of times now to be shown to other people, and you should be able to show your self-care, which again, I think it's okay to have that just be to yourself, and not have a performative aspect. It is often targeted toward female identified folks, or stereotypically feminine activities. So a lot of it's commercial, and a lot of it is, things like makeup, things like bath bombs, buying, new leggings for your workouts, all of these things. And just like a lot of things that are targeted toward female identified folks, I'm sure there is a men's market now for that, as soon as, companies figure out how they can tap into that. It's also treated as a mindset and a personal responsibility, right? Like you have to be in the right mindset. If you are not doing well, you really need to do self-care. It places a lot of responsibility on us to be well. And, there's other things going on in our lives, in the world, that is outside of our control and that we're going to have reactions to. And it's this idea also with the mindset and personal responsibility of that if you're not doing well, you need to just try harder, which in itself is like very counterintuitive to self-care. I think self-care takes a lot of compassion. I'm a big proponent of self-compassion. And so I think that, when it becomes almost more like a goal, it really loses the essence of what it is. in the chat. Okay. So self-care in pop culture. When I was preparing to talk to y'all today, I wanted to give you some ideas of what self-care looks like. Now, this is just, I'm trying to make a point here, right? Like if you look up self-care, there are actually a lot of really good products out there and ideas for self-care. There's books on how to do self-care. There are things that, might make cooking easier for you and enable you to have more homemade meals. Also self-care. But also what we find on Amazon when we type in self-care is, how to hydrate your face with a product. And so that's self-care. Again, we're holding two things as possible, right? Could this be self-care? Absolutely. But what we notice is that there is this tendency toward aesthetics, this tendency toward buying things, right? So this is, I actually don't know what this does. I think it's supposed to make your face like tighter. I don't know that would work. But these are also some of the things that we see when we look up self-care. And I don't really know, if we go back to our plant analogy, if something like this is really getting at the core of what we need to function and thrive in the world. No hate if you buy any of these products. We all, like I said, I love my Lush bath bombs. It's okay. But we have to look at kind of the trends and what might be soaking into our students, right? And the folks that we are leading and setting examples for, like what are they internalizing as self-care? This is also self-care. And anyone from Sac State that's here, please don't rat me out, but I actually took this picture in the Hornet bookstore where they have supplies. I was there with my husband and we were getting t-shirts, and I noticed that there was a section on the wall called, I know, I'm so sorry, called self-care, and it was all makeup products. And I told him, I said, I have to take a picture of that. I have to show somebody. I might reach out to the Hornet bookstore and see if they'd be willing to change their signage to makeup products. But it also shows that even when we're trying our best, right, there's still often this message that self-care is things like makeup. Literally, that's all that's there is makeup, I promise. Could makeup be self-care? Yes, absolutely. But so many times nowadays, that is what it's synonymous with. So I wanted to show that. Please don't get me in trouble if you work at Sac State. So we've talked about self-care in pop culture. We've talked about maybe what it is. We need to ask UEI for that. Yes, let's talk to some folks in other departments, right? But what is self-care really? And again, I'm not this authority here to tell you like, do this, don't do that. But I want to give you some ideas of what self-care, like really good self-care, can look like. There we go. Again, it's caring for yourself. Always you can bring it back to that. Is this caring for myself? Is this nourishing me? Is this helping me to function in the world at its most basic? I really like this quote as well. It's an insistence that you matter. And a lot of folks see self-care as selfish, right? I have to care for others before myself. I have to, I don't have time for self-care. I hear that a lot. I don't have time for self-care. It's just this idea that like you matter, the care of you matters. And again, I don't say that to make it sound like it's easy, because a lot of times it is hard for us to acknowledge that we really matter. And the folks that we talk to, I talk to students every day who really struggle with this idea and with this concept, that they are super important, and that's not being narcissistic, and that's not, a failing. It's actually a really beautiful thing. And, if you are caring for yourself, just like my plants matter and they mean a lot to me. And so I want to make sure that they're nourished. It's sustainable. And I know I put a picture of a tree, but I don't mean sustainable as in like the environment. Although it probably also should be sustainable if that's a value you have, if that's important to you. But it's sustainable as in it's something that we can continue to practice. It's something that is not so hard to put into our lives that we can't keep up with it, that we can't continue to do it, that it will sustain us as well, right? Like that we can keep going. And there's a lot of fads out there, right? And so this is something that it's a practice, it's a way of viewing things, it's a mantra, it's whatever it is that is going to have a place in your life and is not just gonna, be something you do for a week and then you realize like, oh, I can't keep doing that. Or I don't want to keep doing that, right? Like it doesn't fit for you. It's also resistance against pressure to burn out. There's a lot of pressure nowadays, even with hashtag self-care, of like, but still be productive. And I think we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, right? There was take care of yourself, hashtag self-care, do a face mask, bake some bread, and also like start a side business and rearrange your dining room and install a whole shelving unit in your closet because you're at home and you should have like a side hustle while you're at home. And it's a lot of pressure for us to be productive and to do something and to create something. And sometimes self-care is saying, you know what, I'm not going to bake bread during the pandemic. Like, I just don't want to. That's okay. I'm not going to be productive during the pandemic. Maybe I just need to like take some time and just breathe, and that's okay. And the more we are able to care for ourselves, the more we are going to keep a distance from burning out, right? And burnout looks like I'm stressed, I'm irritable, I don't feel good, I don't really care about what I'm doing anymore, all of those things. And we don't want to get to that place. And so this is in a kind of broad way what self-care really does look like. So what are some types of self-care? This is not an exhaustive list. There's emotional self-care, mental self-care, physical self-care. So a lot of folks think of physical self-care as sleep, as exercise, as let's see, eating, our eating patterns, right? Sometimes it's even more basic than that. And those are all very important self-care things. Sometimes it's, how does my body feel right now? Do I need water, right? Like right now, and it's probably because I'm talking a little bit, but also like I need water. I can tell I haven't had enough water today. That's usually not hashtag self-care, is just like drink a reasonable amount of water. It's not very like cool, or it's hard to sell a product, Do you need food? Do you need to rest? Are you clenching your jaw? Are you tightening your shoulders? Just thinking about how your body feels and what it needs is physical self-care. Mental self-care, again, having just kind of that curiosity and attunement with yourself. What thoughts are filling my headspace, and not to be critical of those things of like, why do I always think about this? Why can't I shut off my mind? But just thinking like, what do I need? Maybe I need to journal some stuff out. Maybe I need to talk to someone. Mentally, I'm not feeling very good. And then the same thing with your emotions. Are you feeling cranky? Are you feeling scared or sad? How are we going to cope with those things? What do you need? And again, a lot of this, the interpersonal part, the spiritual part, the environmental part, and again, not like recycling, but which is important, but just what's in your environment, right? Like how is your surrounding space working or not working for you? And just thinking about those things, and what it really comes back to is, what do I need based on these things? Sometimes we don't know, and that's okay. Sometimes we're like, I don't know what I need. I just feel anxious, and that's okay. But if you're wondering how to do self-care, a really basic component to start with is, how am I feeling? And based on that, what do I need? You know, it's a good, I think sometimes getting back to basics when we're not sure how to start is really, really helpful. Water. So back to basics. A really good example of this is there's a theory in nursing of the importance of self-care and how nurses can help their patients with self-care. And again, it's really basic. It's not about running 5 miles a day. It's not about eating as much chocolate as they want. It's aimed at fostering independence for folks that have been, struggling with medical issues. It's making sure they can do their hygiene. It's making sure they can get dressed and do their grooming. It's making sure they can feed themselves, toileting, making sure they can speak and communicate. And a lot of folks, if you say this kind of stuff as being self-care, they're like, that's just like basic stuff you should be doing. It is basic stuff we all should be doing to do well in the world. There is probably more to self-care than that, but those are the basics. And a lot of times we try to jump over those things. Like, well, I haven't got a haircut in 3 months, but I'm starting a new spin class. Like, okay, or also you haven't had enough water today, so maybe you shouldn't do yoga if you haven't had enough water, or maybe you shouldn't get a pedicure if you're not eating enough every day. So we try again the hacks, right? Especially I think younger people, and I hate to say younger people, I don't say it in a pejorative way. I love young folks. I think this generation that's in just traditionally starting college right now and they're in high school, they're so cool. I love them. But I think there's this idea of like jumping over the basic things. Like you should be doing these really extraordinary self-care things when you're not doing the basics. And that if you just start with the basics, it's a good place to start. And really important to not jump over those things. For a lot of students who come in and they say they want coping skills and self-care, and they're not eating enough during the day, and they're not sleeping enough. And they're very surprised when I say, like, well, you have to do that first or nothing's going to work. Here's some kind of specific examples of other types of self-care. And this is kind of like Cathy's list of things that came to my mind. And there are also things that might not come to the forefront of our mind as self-care. And there are things sometimes that we think of as not self-care, right? Like doing your taxes. People are like, that's not self-care, but it is, right? Like, gotta do your taxes. And I use that as an example because most people find that really stressful and upsetting and frustrating, or at the best, probably an annoyance. But that's self-care. You got to do it. It's a responsibility that you have to do. It's things like taking medicine, right? If you're prescribed medicine and that's something that is good for you in your life, it's a decision you've made to take, some kind of over-the-counter or prescription, take your medicine, right? Take it regularly. Take it as you're supposed to. Exercise. Exercise is good self-care. And for me, it doesn't have to be in a gym. It's really, I should have said movement instead of exercise, but it's about movement, right? It's about moving our body in a way that fits with our abilities, our physical abilities. It's a way that feels really good to us. So sometimes it's stretching, sometimes it's roller skating, sometimes it's like walking around the mall, whatever it is. For some people, it's weightlifting, whatever it is. But moving your body is really good self-care. Keeping up with friends. A lot of times folks that tell me they don't have time for self-care, one of the first things to go is social activities and friends. And social connections are really important to whatever extent that fits in someone's life, but they are very important. Reading a book can be self-care. I love saying no and saying yes. Those can both be self-care because sometimes we feel like we can't say no, right? If we're kind of a people pleaser or we just don't like conflict. We say yes to everything and then we're overwhelmed, or we're just ending up doing things we don't really want to do. Also, saying yes can be self-care. Some folks, oh, I can't go to that party with my friends. I have to get more work done. Or I just want to stay at home and isolate myself, when really saying yes to some things might actually be really helpful. And again, this is sort of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, is it's about going outside of your comfort zone sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And so a lot of folks would see things on this list and say, well, I don't like that, and it's stressful, so it's not self-care. It is still self-care. Pruning my plants probably doesn't feel good to them. I don't know that plants have feelings, but cutting off their leaves, it seems kind of like vicious, right? But it's self-care. It helps them grow and it helps them thrive, and we're getting like dead, crispy leaves off. And I'm sure it's outside my plant's comfort zone, but it's good for them. Something like going to a 12-step meeting or another kind of support meeting, that can definitely be self-care. Playing with animals can be self-care. On the little icon that I have here, setting boundaries. So I work with if you're familiar with the peer health educator program here at Sac State, or if you have a similar one at your school, I work pretty closely as the liaison from counseling services to the Active Minds mental health part of our peer health education. And sometimes as an icebreaker, we'll all share what our favorite self-care is. And everyone, they know me by now, and they always have a joke like, Cathy's favorite self-care is boundaries. And it is one of my number one self-cares is setting boundaries with other people and how they can be with me, and then setting boundaries with myself of keeping myself in my lane of doing things that are healthy for me and that work for me, right? Because a lot of the students, they say, things like taking a walk, spending time with my grandma, which are all great things. And then usually I'll tell them mine is boundaries. And I'm like, boundaries? Like really not that fun sounding. But again, it's really good self-care. I was talking with my mom once about self-care. This was probably a few months ago, and I told her about boundaries being my favorite self-care. And she told me, and I really like this. My mom is a very practical Mary Poppins type person. She said that one of her biggest self-care activities is grooming. She said, you have to make sure to cut your fingernails and cut your toenails and make sure your skin is healthy. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I like that. She's like, make sure to dry off your toes real good after a shower, very basic. And I thought that was really great. Cindy, let's see. So on your calendar, you have mental health breaks and self-care lunch. I like that. And like you said, it's on the calendar, right? I don't want to call you out, but do you want to say more about that? Do you want to unmute and say more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was so easy to move my break because it was just something that it's like I can move it. But then I would catch myself not eating lunch till 3 o'clock when I start at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Ooh.
And then I asked myself, did I eat? So it required me to make sure to put myself first, even to nourish my body. So 100% resonates with me right now.
Good. I'm so glad that you shared that. And I love the idea of putting it on your calendar, right? It's right there. It reminds you, and it kind of makes it like it seems more official, right? This is something I'm doing in my day is my self-care. And a lot of times, like I said, when people say they don't have time for self-care, I'm like, calendar it in, make it a task. It kind of takes the fun out of it. I don't mean to pressure, but yeah, make it one of your, parts of your daily schedule. I think that's fantastic. Let's see. So also, those are just some sort of things we can do for self-care, some kind of behavior, some, activities. I also wanted to talk about sort of some deeper, maybe things that we can do for self-care. And this is where things get a little less concrete, right? But I think that self-care, it's not always this concrete behavioral task that we do. And one of the things that I think is really important with emotional self-care and mental self-care is acknowledging our experiences with oppression, right? Because that is all around us. And it's with a lot of, not just ourselves, but the students we're working with, the folks that we're working with, just to acknowledge, like, we're living in some tough times, right? And especially for certain folks, there are some things pressing on them right now that are extra heavy and might always be there. And you don't even have to do anything with that, but just acknowledging it and validating it, I think, can be really nourishing for ourselves and really, really, yeah, I would say just nourishing and just kind of letting us know, like, you know, the things that we're feeling are really valid, this is not my idea. There's some really great resources from Brandy Jackson on YouTube. She does have a lot of like face masks and stuff, but I won't fault her for that. But she also talks a lot about self-care, especially for BIPOC folks. And I think that that's really important. And not just for BIPOC folks, but anybody who is experiencing some, you know, systemic issues, some oppression because of who they are, whether it's because of your financial status or whatever it is, your gender identity, that just having a space with yourself, or sometimes having a space with other folks too, to say like, yeah, this is happening. Again, this is not something that a lot of people think of self-care, because a lot of times acknowledging things like that and talking about it, it doesn't like feel very good, right? Like, and so we think, well, self-care should make you feel happy and good, and not always, but it is nurturing yourself. It's nurturing certain parts of yourself, I think, to do that. I think also taking a break from the source of your stress. And this is not as much focused on like taking a day off from work, which I will kind of address later, but more like that day-to-day stress. And again, we saw this a lot during the pandemic. I think not just because of social media, because social media has been around now for like 10 years or so, like pretty solidly. But during the pandemic, that's what a lot of people were doing. They were on social media. And that's where a lot of our stress comes from, right? Social media, the news, it can be from people in your life, right? If they're a source of stress, and taking a break from that. And a lot of times people will say, you know, I can't take a break from being the identity that I am. And that's absolutely true. But you can also take a break from social media, or you can take a break from listening to your friend that is saying really unhelpful things or stressful things. Like, that is absolutely self-care. It's things that you can control in your life, right? And if it's possible, because again, sometimes it's not possible to take a break, and that is a privilege, but if we can take a break, it's a really great thing to do. Processing with a supportive person, someone who's validating, someone who's informed, right? Someone maybe with a similar identity or identities to you, to have those spaces, whether it's just you and a trusted person, or even, you know, a group of people that you can process your feelings and your experiences and know that you're going to get support. And then similarly, finding a community that supports your values. So it's okay to be with like-minded people. I know that a lot of times, you know, we hear these things like echo chambers and, well, you should hear other points of view, but you know what? Self-care is being around people that fill you up and support you, and you don't have to explain things. And, you know, it's not that you're not being challenged, but it's a safe space. And I think that that is really, really good self-care. And it's also that part of self-care that's rooted in connection and the community, right? That we were talking about earlier. It's this idea that you also can help others with their self-care and connect. And it's a really, really great thing. So just asking for help from whoever it is, telling someone you need help, reaching out is self-care. And maybe you're reaching out because you don't know how to further do self-care in whatever situation you're in. but just reaching out and saying like, I need some help. Like, can you help me? Is absolutely self-care. It's a very vulnerable thing to do. For middle leader, this is all for middle leaders, right? But specifically, distance from toxic environments, I think is really important. And again, like there's only so much we can control. If you're stuck in meetings every week with like this certain person or these certain people or this topic, sometimes you can't get out of that, right? But again, going back to what we can control, going back to maybe you don't have to sit at that lunch table with those people like whoever's toxic. Maybe you don't have to be on that committee, right? Like sometimes we ask, volunteers to be on a certain committee. Maybe you're finding that really stressful or really, really toxic. And it's okay to say like, you know what? I think I can't be in this environment. It's not going to sustain me. It's chipping away at how I'm feeling. And again, getting on that road toward burnout. And so the times that you do have a choice, it's okay to make that choice. It's okay to tell other folks to make that choice of like, if you got to get out of there and you can get out of there. Delegate tasks without guilt. I work with folks in the working world. I have a separate job other than Sac State, but I also do counseling with folks who are more in the working world. And there's a lot of difficulty delegating tasks, right? We want to make sure things are done correctly. We want to make sure that things get done. Sometimes we feel responsible, like, well, no one else really wants to do it, or I'll just do it. It's easier than asking someone. But delegate tasks, man. Like, not even just asking people for help, but saying like, hey, I need you to do this part of this project. I bolded without guilt, because part of the self-care is delegating. And then part of it is then not racking yourself with guilt for doing it, or second guessing it, or lying awake at night thinking, now does that person hate me because I asked them to do part of this project, or, to follow up with someone for me. Do it without guilt. And remember, when the guilt sneaks up or the anxiety, letting go of that is part of the self-care. I wanted to talk a little bit about having a circle of support. So this is something that we talk with folks about here at Counseling Services. We have a workshop that we're giving for faculty and staff on how to help a student in distress. And as part of that, there's a part on self-care, right? Because you can't help distressed students if you're falling apart. And part of what we talk about for that is this idea of forming an intentional circle of support. This is folks that you can go to when you are dealing with something at work that is stressful, that is maybe upsetting to you, someplace you just need to bounce ideas or debrief. I'm really lucky. I am a really lucky, fortunate person that in counseling services, we have built-in circles of support, just because of the nature of our jobs, right? Like we need to consult on our cases to be ethically responsible and give good treatment. And so every week I get to formally meet with a group of my colleagues, and we get the support that we need. And I realize like how lucky I am for that. It's also important that you think about your own circles of support and folks that you're leading. You might even help them to develop a circle of support for themselves, right? Students, other folks that you're supervising. It's this idea of, who am I going to go to in those instances? Is it these 3 colleagues that I have that we just we agree like, hey, if you need anything, pop by my office, or every Friday we're going to get together for an hour or 30 minutes and just lean on each other, or talk about whatever's bothering us, or get a second opinion about something. And I think what's so nice about something like that, especially something that is formal, that's kind of spoken about more, is it takes away sometimes that question of, is it okay that I talk to this person? Am I burdening them? Am I then just stressing them out too? All of those questions that kind of go through our minds of like, well, they're in my circle. I'm gonna go talk to them. We've already kind of negotiated that and had that discussion that we can lean on each other. Also, think about yourself as a role model. A role model, you're not just a role model for education. You're not just a role model for productivity. You're a role model for self-care. And I'm pretty open with my self-care, with my colleagues and with my clients, the students here, because I want them to know that it's important and that they could be doing that too. So I tell students when I'm sick, like I'm out of the office, I'm sick. I don't come into the office sick because I can't be in the office sick and then tell them to stay home from class if they're sick. Like it just, there's a mixed message there. And so for me, I'll tell them, I told them last week, I was like, or the week before last, I said, I can't see you next week. I'm going to be in Disneyland. Like, I want them to know that they too can go to Disneyland and that they're not going to be upsetting people and that they can do things for themselves. Right. And I learned this from the role models that I've had in my life professionally. So when I was on my internship, just finishing up my graduate program, again, I was in a college counseling center, and every one of the senior staff members there left right at 5. Like they were packing up, ready to go. And we were a really hardworking team, but they were ready and they were like, don't you stay here late. Like there's no reason to be staying here late. You need to get out, you need to go home, you need to have dinner. And it was this really amazing model of professional people who had really good boundaries and really good self-care. And I wasn't just told that I should take care of myself. I saw that I should take care of myself and that I could be a really amazing, productive professional and still take care of myself. And so, consider that to be part of it, is how are you showing that you take care of yourself as you're being a leader, right? It's so much more important than maybe we think it is sometimes. So I know I've kind of dunked a little bit on some things during this presentation, but I wanted to talk about, are these things self-care, right? Our bath bomb self-care, makeup, staying out late, drinking with friends. Like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna go out with my friends. We're just gonna like go to the bars and have fun. And yeah, maybe I have a 7:30 class the next day, but so what? I haven't done this in so long. You can tell I hear that kind of story over and over again. Pedicures, right? Let's go get pedicures and drink wine. Taking a mental health day, right? These are things that to me are not inherently self-care, but they're not inherently not self-care. These are things that are a little bit sticky. And I think we need to ask ourselves some questions about, why am I doing this? How is this helping me? How is this maybe hurting me? Is this something that, again, is going to like really feed me? Is this something that I'm doing on top of those basic things? Like I ate a good dinner, I talked to a friend, now I'm going to practice with my cool new makeup, right? Not instead of the basic self-care. Also, just because it's not self-care doesn't mean you can't do it, right? Like it doesn't have to be, we do all kinds of things in this world that are just fun and nice, and they don't have to be self-care. But the reason why I bring up some of these things is because they get labeled a lot of times as self-care. Like this is self-care, and these are the self-care things that people should do when they're depressed or anxious. And this is, if you do enough of it, it'll fix it. Again, I get a lot of questions about taking a mental health day, especially from students. A lot of times, like, should I take a mental health day from class? And I'll ask them a lot of times, like, why are you taking a mental health day? Why are you staying home from class? Is it because you're anxious and you're going to stay home, but then the next class, you're still going to be anxious and want to stay home? Maybe it's not really a mental health day. Maybe you're just don't want to be in your discomfort zone. And maybe you need to challenge yourself to like go to class and know the material, right? That is self-care. Maybe you're taking a mental health day because something really devastating just happened in your life and you don't have the capacity to be present at work or in class. You know what? Yeah, maybe that sounds like a good idea. Are you taking a mental health day because you've burned yourself out? I also hear this frequently, and I have over the years, where people are not doing those basic things. They are running on empty, and then kind of like their tire blowing out, they take a mental health day. And it's not really to fill themselves back up. It's like to catch their breath before they go back under the water. And to me, if that's why you're taking a day off, I'm not saying to take it or not take it, but it's a signal that you or whoever you're talking to probably needs to re-examine how they're doing, right? Like, what is your life looking like right now? Are you too overcommitted? Are you too stressed out? Are you having an illness or mental illness that's not being treated? So again, these things, when they come up, they're not inherently good or bad things, but they're the ones that kind of make me take a pause and ask a little more questions and be a little bit more curious. I wanted to talk a little bit about the wellness industrial complex, kind of to name it. This is what we've sort of been talking about again throughout the presentation, aka hashtag self-care, hashtag face mask, hashtag, all the chocolate in the world. It's important to remember that I don't want to say most, I guess most, a lot of self-care, it doesn't cost anything or it costs very little. And so if you're seeing self-care as being talked about or advertised as very expensive, very, very difficult to get, very exclusive, again, doesn't mean it's not self-care. I mean, hey, going on a cruise can definitely be self-care, but you might want to take a pause and just think, like, is this product I'm buying, is it actually self-care? Again, yeah, maybe it's going to enable you to do something that's normally really hard for you to do, really physically taxing for you to do. And this will get you to do it, which is great. But again, take a pause of like, is this face mask that on Instagram is hashtag self-care, is it though? Is that actually what I need? Self-destruction is often disguised as self-care. And again, I hear this a lot, kind of like the mental health day. Students, self-care, I'm just going to go out and drink tonight. Maybe self-care, again, no judgment, like that might be really cool, but also you might end up really sick and maybe you have class the next day. And maybe every time you've done that before, you've said like, I don't really want to do that anymore, but it's more of a means of coping. That's not really self-care. Also, the idea with the wellness industry, because this is an industry now. It's a huge industry. It's pretty rooted in our system in the United States. I'm sure in some other countries too. It implies that we should be okay all the time. And you know what? We're not okay all the time. I think that self-care, part of it is about sustaining ourselves. Part of it is like treating a wound, right? If we are not okay, if we're struggling with real things in our lives, whether that's systemic things, whether it's just life things, physical things, whatever it is, if you're not okay for a little while, it's not a personal deficit. And I think that's going all the way back to the beginning with the have you tried yoga? A lot of times that's where that comes from and it falls flat, is this idea that I'm not okay because I have fibromyalgia, or I'm not okay because someone really important to me just passed away. And a lot of times it's met with, but have you tried yoga? Like it's okay to not be okay. It's not a personal failing. A lot of times it's not because you're not doing enough self-care. And a lot of times things that are making us feel not okay for a while, it's not about our personal responsibility. It's things outside of our control. And the more we feel like it's our fault or that it is in our control, it adds a lot of shame and guilt, and like we're not doing it right, you know? A lot of students here at Sac State come in for counseling, and we'll talk about the most devastating things in their lives. And then they ask me, like, so how do I feel better? Like, what techniques? And I just tell them there isn't a technique to feel better from that. It's not a technique. It's not a hack. Like, it's healing and it takes a while. And if you still feel bad, it's not because you're not doing enough. And so I think that that is just really, really important to talk about and put out there, right? Because you all will, if you haven't felt that yourself, you probably will hear this, you know, from folks that you're working with, from students, from other folks. Also, here's some questions to ask yourself when something is being sold to you as self-care. Is it a diet, right? And I know people have all kinds of different feelings about diets, but for me, having worked with college students for a long time, having worked with eating disorders for a long time, a diet, for the most part, there's always caveats, but for the most part, a diet is not self-care, right? Eating well, eating healthy food, maybe cooking for yourself, whatever that looks like, eating at your favorite restaurant, that can be self-care. But a lot of times diets are marketed as self-care, and you will see this. If you haven't noticed it, try to notice it over the next week or so. Look at advertising and look at how many diets and food products are being sold as self-care. It's amazing. Is it effective? Again, there's a lot of things that are not effective that are sold as self-care because they make money. Again, it like tap water is not sold as self-care because it doesn't make any money for anyone. But a lot of times it's like, is it effective? Is this even something that works? There is a really great podcast, if you haven't heard of it, it's called Maintenance Phase. And some of it's about dieting, but some of it's really just about the kind of the wellness industry in general. And they did an episode on Goop, which if you don't know what Goop is, I won't get way into it, but it's a company from Gwyneth Paltrow. And it has a lot of like powders and potions and things that are really not based in science at all. And if someone wants to buy these things, that's great. But also think about, like, is this effective or is this even doing anything for me? It's probably not self-care if it's not going to work. Also, does it really make you feel better? Is it just that temporary fix for, okay, I can take a 5-minute break in this sprint that I'm doing so that I can do this thing, but it's not actually really going to help. So again, these are things just to ask yourself, just to consider when you're thinking about, is this thing actually self-care? So the next slide I want to share with you, it has a meme on it. And I like I said, I wanted to bring a little bit of humor to this. This is one of my favorite memes. DBT skills, if you're not familiar, it's a type of therapy. It's like ways to regulate your emotions, mindfulness, things like that. And I just think it's funny because, again, it's this idea that there are forces beyond us, right? There are so many things happening in the world, and people come in for these hacks of, like, they're telling me that they don't have enough money and that their family is having housing instability. And they're like, so what are the techniques to feel better? And I just tell them with so much compassion, like, there isn't a technique to make you feel better that your family has food insecurity or housing insecurity. There's no techniques. There's ways we can help, but there isn't techniques to just feel better. It's not going to just, keep you going, which is, really unfortunate that that's how folks, are being told to feel better. Self-care, it is important. It is not a replacement for professional care. Sometimes we need professional care, right? That's why we're all here. That's why I'm here. That's why my team is here at Sac State. We need to go to therapy. There are things that we cannot do ourselves. So it's not like self-care instead of professional care. It's in tandem, right? It's all of those things together. And it's not a replacement for communal and societal care. It is not a replacement for having a community that fills us up. It is not a replacement for having enough resources and appropriate resources. It's not a replacement for, just a society that treats everyone correctly and gives everyone opportunities. And again, I just say that because you might come across folks who are, wondering about self-care and am I doing it enough and am I doing it right? Now we're getting toward the end because I do want to leave time if there's questions, and y'all are probably half asleep because it's that time of day. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Sac State if you're not here or you're not familiar with what we're doing over here at Student Health and Counseling. We have our health and wellness promotion department who are amazing. And this group of staff, as well as students, our peer health educators and our peer counselors, they are doing a lot to start figuring out how the Sac State community can engage together in self-care. So this idea that, yes, it is the personal focus of what can I do for myself. It's the professional part, right? So it's coming to see a counselor, coming to see one of our primary care physicians or nurse practitioners. And then it's the community part. How can my professor know how to direct me to the right resource? It's how can I learn in my classes about, depression or anxiety? It's making sure that staff and faculty have enough wellness resources. And so that is all kind of a shift. I think that it's come with the pandemic of us realizing that there's 14 counselors for 33,000 students. And so it's just not enough. There's a wellness in the classroom program here, which is great. It's headed by someone that used to be part of our health and wellness promotion department. And it also is aimed at helping faculty to learn about mental illness, to learn about wellness, and to translate that into, their work with students. And then I think I mentioned earlier, we've launched a workshop this semester for faculty and staff on how to help students in distress. Because as y'all probably know, you're running across students who are anxious and depressed and stressed, and they really look to their professors and their advisors and all of those folks for support, and they're nervous and they're scared. And we hear a lot from faculty and staff, I really want to support my students and I'm so afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. And so we've started a workshop this semester, and I say that just to kind of let y'all know what we're doing. And I hope you're doing similar things at your schools and where you're at now. But yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of that. But I think that's all I have for y'all today. I usually put a cute picture of my dog or my cat at the end, and I did not do that today. But I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing and open it up if anyone has any questions, comments, if you want to put anything in the chat, if you want to just, like I said, unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever you'd like to do, please feel free. Oh, thank you, Jessica. And it's okay if there's no questions or anything. I know, like I said, people are really tired. Oh, thank y'all so much. What I'd also like to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat, because I also know it's not everyone's vibe to just put their question out there or their comment. But I'm at c.rojas@csus.edu, and you can also just find me on our Sac State website at the Student Health and Counseling. Oh, I'm so glad that you have a circle of support at Sac State. That's so great. Thanks, Marianne. But please feel free to email me as well if you have any questions or comments or anything, or want to touch base. I'm also the outreach coordinator for our center. So I like to converse a lot with folks. And I want to thank Tracy so much for helping me with the presentation today.
It was really fun, Cathy, right? You had me laughing. So
Oh, good.
yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, I hope y'all have a lovely day. Have fun at the rest of the conference. And yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you,
Bye.
Cathy.
Mhm.